Chapter 5. The night the lights went out, the wind got up on the 15th. It began in the afternoon as a sort of unsettledness, a thing that made the alders down by the brook keep changing their minds, and by 4 o'clock it had stopped pretending. It came over the shoulder of the hill and hit the back of the house and went on doing so steadily for 11 hours, and the whole of Candle End leaned very slightly into it and stayed there, as it had done through a great many other evenings, most of which nobody remembered. Ada had spent the day on the piano. She had taken the front off and the fall out, and she had stood the top open, and she had gone through the whole instrument, string by string, with the tuning lever in her right hand, and her head turned a little to the left, which was how she had stood for 26 years, and which had given her, by now, a permanent small asymmetry that a physiotherapist had once described as fascinating. It was slow work. An instrument that has been left alone for years cannot be brought back in one sitting, because the frame has settled into being wrong. And if you drag it all the way home in a single afternoon, it simply walks back out again over the following fortnight. You have to do it twice, 3 times sometimes. You bring it most of the way and let it think about it, and then you come back. At 4:30 the lights went out. They did not flicker first. They simply stopped all at once, along with the small hum of the refrigerator in the pantry that Ada had not consciously heard for 6 days, and now heard the absence of very clearly indeed. The room went dark blue, and then, over the course of about 4 seconds, it came back in orange. Ada stood with the tuning lever still in her hand and watched it happen. The hearth had been there the whole time, of course, doing what it always did, and it had simply been outvoted by the ceiling light. Now the ceiling light was gone, and the fire came forward and took the room over, and every surface in it changed character. The dresser plates went from white to warm cream. The black beam over the hearth turned the colour of dark honey. Her own hands, when she looked at them, were the hands of somebody in an old painting. The wind hit the back wall. The chimney gave a long, low note, almost exactly an A flat. And Ada said out loud to the empty room, "That is a lovely chimney, actually." She lit the lamp on the table. She made up the fire. She put the kettle on the hook rather than on the electric ring. And while it came to the boil, she got the front of the piano back on, because a piano with its front off in a house with candles in it is an invitation to a very stupid accident. At 5:10, somebody knocked. Ada opened the door, and the wind came in with a young man who had not intended to come in nearly so fast. He was about 23, in a fleece with the delivery company's name on the chest, soaked to the shoulders, holding a telephone up in front of him at an angle that Ada recognized immediately as the angle of a person who's been holding a telephone up for a long time in the hope of a bar of signal. "I am really sorry," he said. "I am really, really sorry. My van is in the ditch about half a mile down, and I cannot raise anybody. And there is no signal, and every single house I have knocked at is out." "Out?" "Nobody in, and it is dark, and I have been walking, and I saw your window, and I thought, right, that is a fire. Somebody is definitely in." "Come in," said Ada. "Shut it behind you, or we will lose the lamp." His name was Danny. He stood dripping on the flags in front of the hearth and steamed gently and apologized approximately 9 more times, and Ada gave him tea and a chair and told him to take his boots off, and he said he could not possibly, and she said that she was not asking, and he took his boots off. At 6:20, Mrs. Peascod arrived with a torch and a basket. "The whole valley is off," she said from the door, shaking rain off the hood of a coat that was itself technically a rain hazard. It is the line at Cleve, the same as always, and they will not have it back before midnight, and they will say 11, and it will be 2. She came in and put the basket on the table, and began without any discussion to unpack it. Bread, a cake tin, a slab of something wrapped in greaseproof paper. "There is a boy here," she observed. "His van is in the ditch." "Whose van?" "Mine," said Danny, in the voice of a man who has done nothing wrong and expects at any moment to be told otherwise. "Then he will want the cake," said Mrs. Peascod, and cut him a piece of it the size of a house brick. Gil Rundle came at 6 with Sam and a bag of kindling, and news that the Loyns were coming up because their generator had made a noise like a fork in a waste disposal and then died. Nancy Loyn came at 20 past with a hurricane lamp and a very wet collie called Bill, who went straight to the hearth, turned round 3 times, and lay down on the warm flags with the air of a creature returning to an ancestral seat. A man called Tobias Ash came at 7:30 because he had seen the cars and had, he said, nothing else on. By 8 o'clock there were 9 people in the front room of Candle End, and 1 dog and 1 cat sitting on the top of the piano with its tail hanging down over the fall, watching the dog with an expression of dignified contempt. Ada, who had lived alone for 11 years, and who had left the flat above the laundrette in some part because she could hear other people's lives through the wall and had begun to find it unbearable, sat on the settle in the corner of a room containing 9 people, and found that she was, unaccountably, all right. More than all right. Nobody was making a fuss of her. That was part of it. They were not there to see her. They were there because the lights were out, and this was the house you came to when the lights were out, and it had been the house you came to for 311 years. And the fact that a stranger from a market town happened to be standing in it this particular December was very nearly beside the point. They came in and put something on the table and took a chair. Somebody found the candle ends in the settle. Somebody else knew where the second kettle was. Sam lay on his stomach in front of the fire with a comic and read approximately 4 pages of it before falling asleep. The talk went on over the top of Ada in the pleasant, slow, meandering way of talk, in a room where nobody has anywhere else to be. The state of the road at Cleve, whether the barn roof would hold, whether Danny's van would need a tractor or merely a rope, and if a rope, whose? A long and detailed disagreement between Gil Rundle and Nancy Loyn about a gate. Somewhere in the middle of it, Ada realized she had been listening to the fire, not to the people, underneath the people. There was a sound coming off that hearth, and it was not one sound but several, and she found herself sorting them the way she sorted a chord. There was the low, steady one, the note of the drawer, which was the chimney itself, and which was more or less an A-flat and did not change. There was the middle one, the working sound, the soft, continuous collapse of ash and the small ticking of the burning. And there was a high one, right at the top, so faint that she only had it when she stopped trying, a thin, bright sound that came and went, and when she finally caught hold of it, she understood that she was hearing the resin in Sam's oak log, which had gone on the fire at 7, going off in tiny bursts like something very far away and very cheerful. She sat with that for a while. At about 10, the wind dropped a little. At 11, Mrs. Peascod said she would be getting on, and did not get on. At midnight, the lights came back, and everybody groaned. And Nancy Loyn got up and turned them off again at the switch, and everybody said that was better, and it was. They went at 1. Gil carried Sam out to the car with the boy's head on his shoulder and his comic in Gil's coat pocket. Danny had been given the small room upstairs and a mattress, and had gone up at 11:30, saying he could not possibly, and had been asleep in 4 minutes. Ada stood in the doorway and watched the tail lights go down the lane and turn at the bottom. Then she came in and shut the door and looked at the hearth. It had burned down while nobody was attending to it. There was a good bed under the grey, and one log still holding its shape at the back, and it wanted feeding. She fed it. She did it properly this time, thinking about it, laying the log in the dip at the front where the flame was thinnest, and setting it just off the square so the air could get up under it, the way she'd watched Gil Rundle do it at 9 o'clock without appearing to look. The bark caught and ran with small blue lights. "All right," said Ada. Chapter 6. What the Fire Remembers. They got Danny's van out on the 16th with a rope and a tractor, and rather more advice than was strictly required, and he drove away at 11 in the morning, having shaken hands with everybody in the lane twice, and promised to come back in the summer, which Ada thought he probably meant at the time, and probably would not do, and she found that she did not mind either way. The days after the storm were very still. That is the way of it in a valley. The weather comes through and empties itself out and then goes off somewhere else, and what it leaves behind is 3 or 4 days of absolute quiet in which the frost gets a proper hold and the brook runs loud because nothing else is running at all. Ada fell into a shape. She had not meant to. She had a list, and the list had things on it about solicitors and valuations and the disposal of contents. And she did work at the list in the mornings, sitting at the long table with a mug going cold at her elbow. But the afternoons went a different way, and by the 4th day she had stopped pretending to be surprised by it. She swept the flags. She learned the woodshed, which was a small stone building at the side of the house with a slate roof and a door that had to be lifted on its hinge to close, and which held, she estimated, about 2.5 years of wood in various states of seasoning, stacked in bays with a chalk mark on the end wall of each bay giving the year it had gone in. The chalk was in a jam jar on the ledge. There were 4 different pieces of it, all worn down to stubs. She learned the tools. There was a hearth brush with a handle polished by 4 generations of hands into something that fitted hers exactly. There was a pair of long tongs that lived on a nail. There was a leather bucket, quite useless, which had hung by the door since about 1890, and which everybody who came into the house touched once on the way past, without ever once appearing to notice that they had done it. Ada noticed it in Gil Rundle, and then in Mrs. Peascod, and then, on the 4th day, in herself. She went down to the church on the Thursday. It was a small church, and the churchyard behind it went up the slope in 3 terraces, and the grass had been cut some time in the autumn and left to lie. She found the bly stones on the middle terrace, 5 of them in a row, and the last one was so new that the cut letters still had the sharpness on them. Honour Bly, and underneath, in smaller letters, a line that Ada stood in front of for some time. She kept it in. She walked back up the lane in the dark with her hands in her pockets and her breath going up in front of her, and she saw the window from the bend, that one deep moving orange among the steady yellow ones, and she felt the thing she had felt at the gate on the first night and had not had a name for. It was not welcome exactly. Welcome is a thing a person does. It was more that the house was on. That night she gave the piano its 2nd pass. It came back much further than she had expected. The frame had held most of what she had given it, and she found herself moving faster, and at about 9 o'clock she got the bass into something like agreement with itself for the first time in probably 30 years. And she sat down and played 8 bars of a very old song that her mother had liked, and the room did something to the sound that no room she had ever worked in had done. It was the stone. Stone and low beams and a fire alight. That was all it was, an acoustic accident of a kind that any hall in the country would have paid a great deal of money for and been unable to buy. The F above middle C still had a chip out of it. She had eased it and levelled it, and it was in tune now. But the chip was a chip, and would always be a chip. And when her finger went over it, there was a small catch, and she found she had no wish whatever to have it repaired. She sat up late. She had got into the habit by then, and had stopped calling it anything. She banked the fire at 11, and then did not go to bed, and instead sat on the settle in the warm, with the book open on her knees, and read slowly, in no order, whatever the pages fell open at. Some time after 1 o'clock she stopped reading. The lamp had burned low, and the fire was down to its deep, quiet stage, the stage where there is no flame at all, but the whole bed of it is alive and breathing, brightening and dimming, brightening and dimming, in that slow rhythm that has nothing to do with the wind in the chimney, and that nobody has ever satisfactorily explained. Ada watched it, and the room began very gently to be full. She wanted to be clear afterwards, when she thought about it, that she did not see anything. There was nothing to see. Nobody stood in the corner. No door opened. If she had told it to a stranger, the stranger would have been disappointed, and she was glad of that, because a thing you can tell to a stranger and have them impressed by it is generally not worth much. What happened was that she stopped feeling alone in the way you stop feeling cold. Not at any particular moment, but by noticing at some point that you have not been for a while. The room was full of nights. That was as near as she could get to it. Not people. Nights. The 8th of January, 1814, and 2 children asleep on these flags with a coat over them. The 18th of December, 1916, and a woman sitting on this settle with her hands in her lap, and word come on the Thursday. 1963, and 11 people breathing in the dark, and the snow up over the gate-post outside. 1694, and somebody quite alone, writing that it was a long night and there was nothing in it. All of them had happened in this room. All of them had happened in front of this fire, which had been burning then and was burning now, without any interruption at all, which meant, when Ada took hold of the thought properly, that the warmth she had on her face at this moment was in some literal and unbroken sense the same warmth. Not a copy of it, not a descendant of it. The same fire fed and fed and fed. Nothing of those nights remained. The people were gone, and the ink had faded, and the weather had long since blown out to sea. But the fire had been a light through all of them, and it was a light now, and it would be a light tomorrow, and that was not nothing. That was, in fact, very nearly the only thing in the entire valley of which it could be said. The fire moved. A section of the bed gave way with a soft collapse, and a scatter of sparks went up and vanished. Ada let out a breath she had not been holding on purpose. The cat, who had been asleep along the back of the settle for 2 hours, got up, stretched with its front legs out long, walked the length of the seat, and settled down again against her hip. "Yes," Ada said. "I know." She got up at last and put 2 logs on, and one of them was oak, and she thought about a boy going red to the ears in the porch, and she went up the stairs to the brass bed under the slope of the roof. She slept until 8 and dreamed, and did not remember any of it except that in the dream there had been a great deal of company, and nobody had asked her anything difficult. Chapter 7. The Longest Night. On the 20th of December, Ada Merrow telephoned Mr. Quill. She did it from the table by the window, standing up, which was how she had always made telephone calls she was nervous about, and she looked at the alders while she did it. "Ah," said Mr. Quill, "Miss Merrow, I have the papers ready whenever you should wish to come in, and I should say at once that the market in that particular valley is not what one might hope, although a property of that age and character will always find somebody, particularly if one is prepared to be patient until the spring. I'm not going to sell it." There was a pause of a length that told her a great deal about Mr. Quill. "No," he said, "no. I did wonder." "Did you?" "Miss Merrow, I have acted for that house since 1981. I have prepared the papers for the sale of it on 2 previous occasions, and I have never yet filed one." He sounded, she thought, entirely delighted, and also as though he would deny it under oath. "Shall I tell Mrs. Peascod, or would you rather? Is that a thing solicitors do?" "In Ashcombe," said Mr. Quill, "it is very nearly the whole of the work." The 21st was clear and hard and beautiful. The sun came over the far hill at 8:20, and went along the tops all day without ever really committing to it, and was gone again behind the shoulder before 4, and the frost that had come down the night before never once let go of the north side of anything. The brook ran with plates of ice at the edges. The heron stood in it anyway. Ada spent the morning laying the fire down. That was Gil Rundle's phrase, and she had made him explain it twice. You did not build a great blaze for the longest night. You did the opposite. You let it come down through the day to a deep, even bed with no flame on it at all, and you raked it forward and levelled it, and you kept it there, hungry and hot and patient, so that when the wood came in the evening it would take at once, and keep taking, log after log, right through to the morning, without ever needing to be started again. "You are not making a bonfire," Gil had said. "Anybody can make a bonfire. You are making a floor." They started arriving at 6. Ada had propped the door and pushed the long table back against the dresser, and she stood in the porch in her coat with her hands round a cup and watched the lane. They came up in 1s and 2s with torches, and every single one of them was carrying a log. Mrs. Peascod came first, because Mrs. Peascod would have regarded arriving second as a personal failure, and her log was birch with the white bark still on it, and she put it down on the flags to the right of the hearth and said, "That is off the tree that came down by the shop in the spring, and I have had it in the back since April, and it is dry, and if anybody tells you birch is a poor wood, you may tell them from me that they are thinking of poplar." Gil Rundle came with Sam. Nancy Loyne came with Bill the collie and a log of seasoned beech and a tin of shortbread. Tobias Ash came with his mother, who was 86 and had not been out of the house since October, and who was brought up the lane very slowly on her son's arm with a small piece of apple wood held in her free hand, and who would not have it carried for her. They came, and they came. Ada stopped counting somewhere around 25. The Loynes from the Ford, a young couple from the barn conversion who had moved in June and had been told about tonight by Mrs. Peascod in the shop, and had spent, Ada suspected, a certain amount of the intervening fortnight wondering whether it was some kind of elaborate joke. 2 teenagers who put their logs down with enormous nonchalance and then hung about by the piano looking pleased. A man Ada had never seen at all, who said he'd grown up here and lived in Reading now and came back for this and only this every year, and had done for 19 years. The logs went down in a long, low wall to the right of the hearth, and by 7 o'clock there were 41 people in the front room of Candle End, and out into the porch and standing about in the frosted garden with their breath going up, and every window in the house was lit, and somebody had put candles all along the sill, and the room was so warm that the door had to be left open, and the cold came in over the flags and met the warmth halfway across the floor. At 7:30, Mrs. Peascod said in a voice that reached the garden, "Right." The room went quiet in about 4 seconds. Gil Rundle came forward with the tongs and set them down on the hearth, and stepped back and looked at Ada. Everybody looked at Ada. She had not known this was coming. She realized afterwards that everybody in the room had known, and that not one of them had told her, and that this was very probably deliberate and possibly even kind. She went and knelt on the flags in front of the hearth, which was hot on her face at that distance, and she took the first log off the top of the wall, and she looked at the bed she had spent the whole day laying down, and she found the dip at the front where the flame would be thinnest, if there had been any flame, and she put the log in it, just off the square, so that the air could get up under. It took immediately. There was a small collective sound in the room, not a cheer, something more like the noise a congregation makes when it sits down. Then they came up one at a time and put their own on. It took about half an hour. Nobody hurried. Some of them said something and some of them said nothing, and Mrs. Peascod said a good deal, and old Mrs. Ash was helped down onto the flags by her son, and would not be helped up again for some while afterwards, and put her piece of apple wood on at the back, where it would burn slow, and said to the fire, rather than to anybody in the room, "There you are, then." Sam Rundle put his on 9th and stood back with his arms folded and watched it for a full minute to make sure it had taken properly. Afterwards there was food and a very great deal of talking, and at some point somebody opened the piano. The two teenagers played first, badly and at length. Then Nancy Loyne, who turned out to have had lessons until she was 15, and to have resented every one of them, and to be, 30 years later, rather good. Then a man from the Ford who could only play one thing, but could play it extremely well. Then they made Ada play. She played the 8 bars of the old song her mother had liked. And then, because 41 people were looking at her and there was nothing else for it, she played the rest of it. And about halfway through, Mrs. Peascod began to sing in a hard, flat, accurate voice that had clearly been doing this in this room for 50 years, and by the last verse most of the room was going. The stone did what the stone did. The sound came off those walls and off that low ceiling, and gathered itself in the middle of the room and hung there. Ada thought with her hands still on the keys. This is what the F above middle C is for. They went home slowly between 11 and 1. At the door, each of them said the same 6 words to her, and it was said so casually and so identically that it took Ada until about the 15th time to understand that it was a formula and that it was old. "Keep it in, then." "I will," she said. 15 times. Then 25, then 41. The last to go was Gil Rundle, with Sam already asleep in the car, and he stood in the porch and put his hat on and looked back into the room at the hearth, which was now a solid mass of burning from one side to the other, deep and orange and utterly untroubled, with the heat coming off it in a slab. "That will go until Thursday," he said, "without you doing much at all." "I know. You will still want to look at it." "I know that as well." He nodded and went down the path, and at the gate he said, without turning round, "She would be pleased. I'm not going to say anything else about it, because it is late and I am 71, but she would be pleased." When they had all gone, Ada shut the door and stood in the room. 41 people had been in it. There were crumbs on the flags and a candle guttering on the sill and somebody's glove on the settle. The cat came out from wherever the cat had spent the last 5 hours and looked at the room with an expression of profound relief. Ada got the book out and set it on the table and opened it at the first blank page and found the pen in the cedar box where it had always been, and sat down. She wrote, "The 21st of December, clear and very hard. Frost all day and no wind. Sat up with the village, 41 of them by my count, and Winifred says 43. Then she stopped and looked at the page for a while and added one more line. "Have been asked. Have said yes." She signed it. and went and put her name on the flyleaf under Honor Bly's, and blotted it, and shut the book, and put it away in the settle under the seat where it had lived for 311 years. Then she banked the fire, which did not need banking, and looked at it, which it did not need either, and went up to bed. Chapter 8. Morning. Eventually January was the hard one. Everybody had told her it would be. Mrs. Peascod told her in the shop, and Gil Rundle told her while stacking, and Nancy Loyne told her over a gate, and every one of them told her in the manner of a person passing on something they had been told themselves, which is the way most useful information travels in a village. The longest night is not the worst night. The longest night has a fire in it, and 41 people and a piano. The worst nights come 3 weeks later, when the light is technically returning and cannot be detected by any means available to the human eye, and the frost has gone on so long that the ground has stopped even pretending to thaw at midday, and nobody has any money left, and there is nothing whatever to look forward to before the middle of March. Ada worked through it. She gave up the flat above the launderette in the second week of the month, by telephone, which took 11 minutes and cost her a month's rent, and felt, when she put the receiver down, like taking off a coat she had been wearing indoors for a long time. She kept the work. She had thought she would have to give that up too, and had been quietly grieving it. And then Mr. Quill, who turned out to be a person of unexpected resource, mentioned her to somebody who mentioned her to somebody else. By February she had 4 schools, 2 churches, a hotel in the market town with a grand piano that had been ruined by an underfloor heating system, and a waiting list. It turned out that there were a great many pianos in that part of the country, and almost nobody to see to them, and that people would wait 6 weeks for somebody who knew what they were doing. She bought a very old estate car with a heater that worked on one setting only, and drove out in the mornings and came back in the dark. And every evening from the bend in the lane she saw the window. That was the part she had not anticipated. She had thought about the tending, which was work, and she had been prepared for the work. She had not thought about the coming home, about driving 40 miles in the dark with cold feet, and taking the turn at the bottom and seeing that one moving orange light up above the other roofs, and knowing that it had been doing that all day while she was out, and that it would go on doing it, and that it had never once, in 311 years, failed to be there for anybody who came round that bend. She had not, in her whole life, had anything on while she was out. There was a knock in the 3rd week of February at 10:30 on a wet night. Ada opened the door to a woman of about 30, standing in the rain with a rucksack and no coat worth the name, who said she was walking the ridge path and had misjudged it badly, and that she was sorry, and that she had seen the light. "Come in," said Ada. The woman stayed until the morning. She sat by the fire with her boots off, and a bowl of soup, and did not say very much, and Ada did not ask her very much. And at some point around midnight the woman began to talk, in the way people do at that hour in front of a fire when nobody is looking directly at them. And what came out was not really about the ridge path at all. Ada listened. She was good at listening. It was, after all, her trade. In the morning the woman went off down the lane in a borrowed coat with directions to the bus, and turned at the bend and put her hand up, and Ada never heard from her again and had not expected to. She wrote it up that evening. The 20th of February. Wet, mild, wind southerly. Sat up with a walker off the ridge. She was all right in the morning. She looked at the last sentence for a while and then left it, because it was true, and because she had begun to understand that this was the register the book was written in, and that she had no business improving on it. The light came back in March the way it always does, which is to say all at once and after you have stopped believing in it. One evening it was dark at 5:30, and the next it was not, and within a fortnight there was a green flush on the alders, and the brook had dropped, and the heron had been joined by a second heron, about which Gilrundle had a great many opinions. Ada gave the piano its third pass on a Sunday afternoon, with the door propped open. It came all the way home. She went through it string by string with her head tilted, and the small differences got smaller, and then they were gone, and she played a chord with both hands, and it sat in the room and stayed exactly where she had put it. That was the sound she had never been able to describe to anybody. A room letting its breath go. Sam Rundle came up in April on his bicycle, with a comic and a bag of crisps, and the general air of a person conducting an inspection. He put a log on, unasked, correctly, off the square. "Does it ever go out?" he said. "No." "But does it ever nearly go out?" Ada thought about it properly, because he had asked it properly. "There is a night in 1841, she said. "It is in the book. Somebody was ill, and somebody else was supposed to come and did not. And the entry the next morning is 4 words long, and the 4 words are, very low. Nearly lost her. What happened? They got her back. They took the bellows to it, and they fed it slowly, and by the middle of the morning she was going again." Ada picked up the brush and swept a little ash forward. "Then they put a rule about it in the front of the book, which is why there are always 2 people who know it is their night, and why your grandfather did Tuesdays and Fridays, and why he will not tell me which day he has quietly given himself now, although I know it is Thursdays, because on Thursdays the basket is full and I did not fill it." Sam considered this. "So it did nearly go out." "Once, that we know of, in 312 years. "That is a good record," said Sam generously. "It is a very good record," said Ada. He ate his crisps and read 4 pages of his comic, and fell asleep on the flags in a patch of sun. And the cat came and sat on his back, and Ada went on with what she was doing, and let them get on with it. In the end, she did not tune the F above middle C out of existence. She could have replaced the key. There was a man in Hereford who did that sort of work, and would have matched the ivory well enough that nobody but a specialist would ever have found it, and it would have taken a fortnight and cost less than she had feared. She decided against it. She thought about a woman of 91, writing at this table in September with the light going, deciding what the last things were that needed saying, and choosing, among all the things she might have chosen, to mention a chipped key that had bothered her for 72 years. That was not a note about a piano. That was a woman leaving something for somebody to find. So the chip stayed, and Ada's finger went over it perhaps 200 times a week, and every single time there was a small catch, and every single time she thought, for about 1/4 of a second, of Honour Bly. "That is what the fire is," she wrote in the book much later, in her 3rd winter, on a night when she had sat up alone and there had been nothing in it. "It is not that it remembers anything. It does not remember. It is only wood and air and 300 years of somebody bothering. But everything that has ever happened in this room happened in front of it, and it was a light then, and it is a light now, and it has not stopped in between, and while it is going, none of it is quite over. I do not expect that to be true. I only find that it is. She banked it at 11, the way you do, raking the grey up over the red so that it would hold through the small hours without wanting anything from anybody. Then she stood for a moment in the dark room with her hand on the warm stone of the beam, which is a thing every keeper of that house has done, and none of them has ever mentioned to another. The fire breathed, brightened and dimmed, brightened and dimmed. Outside, the frost came down over Ashcombe, and the brook ran on under it, and the long night went by, and in the window of the last house up the lane there was a light that was not steady, and that leaned and settled, and leaned again. And in the morning, as it always had, it was still going.